Meditations on the Tarot, Letter 18, The Moon. God forbade Lot and his family to look back, but Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Genesis 19:26. David's heart smote him after he had numbered the people. And David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. So the Lord sent a pestilence upon Israel. 2 Samuel 24:10-15. Our intelligence, as it leaves the hands of nature, has for its chief object the unorganized solid. Of the discontinuous alone does the intellect form a clear idea. Of immobility alone does the intellect form a clear idea. The intellect lets what is new in each moment of history escape. It does not admit the unforeseeable. It rejects all creation. The intellect is characterized by a natural inability to comprehend life. But it is to the very inwardness of life that intuition leads us. By intuition I mean instinct, that has become disinterested, self-conscious, capable of reflecting upon its object, and of enlarging it indefinitely. Henry Bergson. Dear unknown friend, the prohibition to Lot and his family against looking back, David's sin in having numbered the people of Israel, and the characteristic traits of human intelligence, as opposed to intuition, formulated by Henry Bergson, have this in common, that they relate to the problem of the inversion of the forward movement of life, i.e., they relate to the problem of retrograde movement. Now, it is the problem of retrograde movement, contrary to that of life, which is suggested spontaneously by the card of the 18th major arcanum of the tarot, the moon. It is the antithesis of the 17th arcanum, the star. For if the latter evokes ideas, feelings, and impulses of will relating to the evolution of life and consciousness concerning their infinite development, the former evokes ideas, feelings, and impulses of will relating to the inversion of the evolutionary movement of life and consciousness, i.e., to their envelopment, arrest of movement, and retrograde movement. Instead of the current which flows and the verdant shrubs of the card of the 17th arcanum, we find the stagnant water of a swamp and 2 rigid stone towers in the card of the 18th arcanum. Instead of the naked woman who makes the current, which continues in its flow, emanate from the 2 vases, we find an image of the most enveloped or shielded creature, the crayfish, at the bottom of the swampy basin, and 2 dogs, or a dog and a wolf, which are baying at the moon above. Lastly, instead of the radiant constellation of 8 stars, we find the darkness a total eclipse of the moon. Through the totality of the context of its card, the 18th arcanum of the tarot invites us to a spiritual exercise, to a meditation on that which arrests evolutionary movement and tends to give it direction in an inverse sense. And just as the dominant and principal theme of the 17th arcanum is the agent of growth, so it is a matter in the 18th arcanum of the special agent of diminution, the principle of the eclipse. In the case of the 18th arcanum, it is a matter neither of temptation from outside, which is the subject of the 6th arcanum, nor of devils and demons, the intoxicating and enslaving forces, which constitute the subject of the 15th arcanum, nor even of the presumptuous tendency to build towers of Babel, which is the subject of the 16th arcanum, but rather of something which is there, which is given and imposed on every incarnated human soul by the very fact of being incarnated, i.e., which the fate of being incarnated entails with necessity. The principle of the eclipse, or the agent of diminution, would be present and active in us, even if the devil and all demons resigned, and even if all human beings learnt the lesson of humility and abandoned the desire to build towers of Babel. The 18th arcanum of the tarot is the arcanum of the 2-fold current that Henry Bergson designates as intelligence matter, or materialistic intellectuality, contrary to the 2-fold current duration spirit, or intuition conscience. For the current intellectuality materiality, that Bergson portrays like no other thinker is precisely this agent of diminution, or eclipse principle, that is suggested by the context of the card of the 18th Arcanum. Because the moon is the principle of reflection. Just as it reflects the light of the sun, so does human intelligence reflect the creative light of conscience, and the latter is eclipsed when materialistic intellectuality prevails. Just as man's will to master nature sets materialistic intellectuality in motion and prescribes it the rules of the game for its work, so is the moon of the 18th Arcanum in eclipse, i.e., it is only fringed by rays of reflected sunlight, whilst the surface of the moon itself reflects only the image of a human face in profile. Further, just as the crayfish moves backwards in swimming, so does human intelligence move backwards, i.e. in the direction effect to cause, where it is engaged in the act of knowledge that is proper to it. The other details of this card, the coloured drops which are falling upwards, the two towers, the two dogs which are baying, the stagnant water of the swamp, only make more specific, as we shall see through the following meditation on the central theme of this arcanum, further aspects of the current intellectuality, materiality, that is contrary to the current of creative evolution or duration spirit. The sun, moon, and stars are, according to Genesis, lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth, Genesis 1:16-17, whose creation constituted the fourth day of the creation of the world. Now, human consciousness is the field where three kinds of light are manifest: creative light, reflected light, and revealed light. The first participates in the work of the creation of the world such as it has continued since the sixth day of creation, which we now call creative evolution. The second illumines the dark field of action of the human will, which we now call matter. The last orientates us towards transcendent values and truths which constitute, as it were, the supreme court of appeal, the ultimate criterion of all that is of worth and of all that is true in space and time. It is thanks to these three types of light that man is at one and the same time a creator participating in creative evolution, a master of matter, author of the work of civilization, and that he is a kneeling worshipper of God, capable of orientating his will towards the divine will. Creative consciousness, reflecting intelligence, and revelation from above are the three lights of the human microcosm, its sun, moon, and stars. The three major arcana of the tarot, the star, the moon, and the sun, are those of light revealed from above, reflecting intelligence and creative consciousness. We were occupied with the stellar arcanum in the last letter. In the following letter, we shall be occupied with the solar arcanum. In this letter, it is a matter of the lunar arcanum, i.e., the arcanum of the inseparable couple, the earth and its satellite, the moon, or, for the microcosm, materiality and intelligence. It should be formally pointed out that the 18th arcanum of the tarot reveals the relationship between the moon and the earth. It deals with the couple moon-earth as such, just as, for example, Henri Bergson deals with the couple intelligence-matter as such. For materiality, i.e. the material and mechanical aspect of the world, is to intelligence, i.e. to the faculty of consciousness which proceeds from effects to causes by induction and deduction, as the earth is to the moon. Intelligence is attuned to matter, and the latter is attuned to intelligence by lending itself easily to analysis and synthesis. Matter thus adapts itself to intelligence, and the latter is characterized by the unlimited power of decomposing according to any law and of recomposing into any system. Henri Bergson, Creative Evolution, page 165. They constitute an inseparable couple. Imagine what the state of intelligence would be if it were deprived of the environment of the material world, where there is the unlimited power of decomposing according to any law and of recomposing into any system. Not only would it be incapable of separating out particular things from their enduring totality and grouping them into categories and classes, but also it would be powerless to manufacture the implements and machines which it makes use of to supplement the organs of action and perception with which nature has endowed the human being. The divisibility and malleability of inorganic matter, or matter rendered inorganic, are as indispensable to intelligence as water is to a fish which swims, or as the air is to a bird which flies. They constitute its vital element. Quote, "The essential function of our intellect, as the evolution of life has fashioned it, is to be a light for our conduct, to make ready for our action on things, to foresee, for a given situation, the events, favourable or unfavourable, which may follow thereupon. Intellect therefore instinctively selects in a given situation whatever is like something already known. It seeks this out in order that it may apply its principle that like produces like. In just this does the prevision of the future by common sense consist. Science carries this faculty to the highest possible degree of exactitude and precision, but does not alter its essential character. Like ordinary knowledge, in dealing with things, science is concerned only with the aspect of repetition. Though the whole be original, science will always manage to analyze it into elements or aspects which are approximately a reproduction of the past. Science can work only on what is supposed to repeat itself. Anything that is irreducible and irreversible in the successive moments of history eludes science." Henry Bergson, Creative Evolution, page 31. At the same time, there is reason to point out that the aspect of the repetition of things that intelligence seeks in the first place corresponds to the almost innate inclination of intelligence to reduce movement to immobility and to transform time into space. Repetition is only the immobile element in movement, and the spatial element in time. When, for example, we speak of the yearly cycle of seasons, we turn the movement of time into space. We replace movement by the representation of a circle in space, and this circle signifies the stable repetition of the course of the seasons: springtime, summer, autumn, winter, springtime, etc. No one has stated this postulate of intelligence, i.e. repetition, and the consequent transformation of time into space, with more force than Solomon, who says in Ecclesiastes, "What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, See, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to happen among those who come after." Ecclesiastes 1, 9-11. Clearly, it is a matter here of a postulate, a dogma of faith for intelligence, because the statement by Solomon surpasses the limits of experience by affirming something which arises as new in the field of immediate experience must be the repetition of something old, fallen into forgetfulness, and that it is only ignorance due to the forgetfulness of the past which makes it appear as new, and that it will be just the same in the future, i.e. everything that will be judged as new will be thanks only to forgetfulness of what happens in the present. Time creates nothing. It only combines and recombines that which is given forever in space. Time is like the wind, and space is like the sea. The wind produces waves in infinite repetition on the surface of the sea, but the sea remains the same. It does not change at all. Therefore there is nothing, and there cannot be anything new under the sun. This is the postulate of intelligence, advanced some 3,000 years ago, which is still accepted and which underlies the way that intelligence works. And here is its antithesis, formulated by Bergson. The universe endures. The more we study the nature of time, the more we shall comprehend that duration means invention, the creation of forms, the continual elaboration of the absolutely new. Henry Bergson, Creative Evolution, page 11. We shall return later to the Bergsonian and Hermetic antithesis, when the necessity for it will be blindingly apparent as the natural reply to this postulate of intelligence, and when it will present itself to the mind as, so to say, the complementary colour to the arcanum, the moon. For the arcanum, the moon, insofar as it is a spiritual exercise, has no other aim than to evoke the conscious desire to go further than intelligence, and to decide to make a leap in order to leave its sphere. But let us return to the pair intelligence-matter, or intellectuality-materiality. The intellect aims, first of all, at constructing. This fabrication is exercised exclusively on inert matter, in this sense that even if it makes use of organized material, it treats it as inert, without troubling about the life which animated it. And of inert matter itself, fabrication deals only with the solid. The rest escapes by its very fluidity. If, therefore, the tendency of the intellect is to fabricate, we may expect to find that whatever is fluid in the real will escape it in part, and whatever is life in the living will escape it altogether. Our intelligence, as it leaves the hands of nature, has for its chief object the unorganized solid. Henry Bergson, Creative Evolution, pages 161 to 162. Thus, the axiom of intelligence, that the whole is greater than the part, is valid wholly and without reserve when it is a matter of a solid body or a liquid measure, i.e., when fluid is rendered similar to a solid body. Half a stone is evidently smaller than the whole stone, and half a glass of water indicates less water than a whole glass. But this axiom is not valid unreservedly when it is a matter of the functions of a living organism. You can certainly have a leg cut off, which is many times larger than the heart of the human body, without death ensuing, but you cannot do without the heart, without dying. The function of the heart is more essential to the life of the whole organism than the leg, although the heart is very much smaller than the leg. Thus, with respect to a living organism, the axiom in question has to be modified, in the sense that, from the point of view of functioning, the functioning parts and the functioning whole can be equal. Therefore, so far as the functioning of a living organism is concerned, one could bowl over the bourgeois logician with the formula, the whole can be equal to the part. The same axiom, applied to the moral domain, should undergo still further an active modification. In the domain of pure values, the axiom in question changes its form and becomes transformed into its contrary. Indeed, Caiaphas's argument in favour of a decision against Jesus advanced to the assembly of the Sanhedrin, that it is expedient for you that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation should not perish. John 11:50, is evidently simply an appeal to the logical axiom that the whole, the nation, is of higher value, than the part, a single man. But the whole Jewish nation had no other reason for existence than part of it, the Messiah. Still more, is the Word, through which all things were made and outside of which nothing has come into existence, and which became flesh, see John 1:3-14, a part, or is it the whole of the Jewish nation, mankind, lastly, the whole world? Or again, take the parable of the lost sheep, where the master says, if a man has 100 sheep, and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the hills and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly, I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. Matthew 18:12-13. Is the axiom that the whole is greater than the part still valid in the domain of moral values? Or again, take the parables concerning the treasure hidden in a field, the pearl of great price, and the lesson of the poor widow's 2 copper coins. Is it not evident from them that for the world of values the axiom in question should be the part can be greater than the whole? These conclusions, at which one arrives when one applies logic to the organic and moral spheres, are shocking for intelligence, whose rules of logic are in accordance with inorganic solidity. David's great sin, in ordering that the people of Israel be numbered, see 2 Samuel 24:2, consisted in the application of the method proper to human intelligence of reducing the living and moral to inorganic solidity, i.e., men to things, the living and moral, the community of Israel, to number. In giving the order to count the people of Israel, David committed the sin, in the spiritual domain, of having reduced living and feeling human beings to dead and inanimate things, i.e., to corpses. Thus he sinned against the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." And it was not only during the darkest time of the year, when the nights are at their longest, but it was also under the sign of virgin intelligence eclipsed by human terrestrial intelligence, that the nativity of Jesus Christ took place. For it took place at the time of an enrolment of the whole world. In those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be enrolled, when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Luke 2:1-2. It was a time when the sin of David was repeated, but on the scale of the Roman Empire over all the world. Then Caesar Augustus decreed that all living and feeling human beings, including the incarnated Word, be treated as inanimate things. It was winter time as far as the sun is concerned, and the time of an eclipse of the moon as far as intelligence is concerned. Our intelligence is only at ease, it is only entirely at home, when it is at work on raw matter, and in particular on solid objects. Quote, "What is the most general property of the material world? It is extended. It presents to us objects external to other objects, and in these objects, parts external to parts. No doubt it is useful to us, in view of our ulterior manipulation, to regard each object as divisible into parts arbitrarily cut up, each part being again divisible as we like, and so on ad infinitum. To this possibility of decomposing matter as much as we please, and in any way we please, we allude when we speak of the continuity of material extension. But this continuity, as we see it, is nothing else but our ability, an ability that matter allows us to choose the mode of discontinuity we shall find in it. It is always, in fact, the mode of discontinuity, once chosen, that appears to us as the actually real one, and that which fixes our attention, just because it rules our action. Thus, discontinuity is thought for itself. It is thinkable in itself. We form an idea of it by a positive act of mind, while the intellectual representation of continuity is negative, being at bottom only the refusal of our mind, before any actually given system of decomposition, to regard it as the only possible one. Of the discontinuous alone does the intellect form a clear idea. Henry Bergson, Creative Evolution, pages 162 to 163. For this reason, not only science decomposes, e.g. objects, into chemical substances, the latter into molecules, molecules into atoms, and atoms into electrons, but also occult science, which would like to equal official science, decomposes. For example, the human being is decomposed into three principles, spirit, soul, and body, when it is a matter of the place that man occupies between God and nature, or into four principles, physical body, vital body, astral body, and ego, or self, when it is a matter of the practical task of mastership by the operant of his instruments, as is the case in Raja Yoga, or even into seven principles, physical body, etheric body, astral body, lower self, reason, intuition, and higher self, when it is a matter of the evolution of the human being in time, or lastly into nine principles, three corporeal principles, three soul principles, and three spiritual principles, when it is a matter of the relationship between microcosm and macrocosm, with its nine spiritual hierarchies, which reflect in their turn the divine Holy Trinity. If we add here also that Christian theology divides man into only two principles, body and soul, that the Vedanta and the Kabbalah divide him into five principles. For the Kabbalah these are Basar, Nefesh, Neshama, Haya, and Yehidah. The Kabbalists also divide man into 10 principles, according to the 10 Sephiroth, and that certain astrologers divide him into 12 principles, according to the 12 signs of the zodiac. It becomes evident that man easily allows himself diverse modes of decomposition, according to the aims of the intelligence which applies them. But he admits of this operation only insofar as he is given over to the manipulations of intelligence which treat him in the way proper to it, i.e. which decompose him according to a system corresponding in the best possible way to the ends that the will is aiming at. Because intelligence, even when it is engaged in occult science, clearly represents to itself only the discontinuous. For this reason, intelligence represents motion to itself as if it were discontinuous. It reconstructs motion by means of a motionless series that it places side by side, i.e., it makes the motion stop a desired number of times, obtaining in this way a cinematographic film, that it then makes roll. Suffice it now to say that to the stable and immobile our intellect is attached by virtue of its natural disposition. Of immobility alone does the intellect form a clear idea. Henry Bergson, page 164. The Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea, 5th century BC, author of the celebrated arguments concerning the flying arrow and Achilles and the tortoise, who lived 24 centuries before cinematography, even denied the reality of motion for the reason that intelligence can represent only a succession of static positions in movement. Just as Solomon proclaimed 3,000 years ago the postulate of intelligence that there is nothing new under the sun, so did Zeno proclaim 24 centuries ago the other postulate of intelligence, that there is no continuous movement, there are only successive points of rest. Intelligence is attached above all to positions of movement, and not to the progress through which it passes from one position to another, progress which is movement itself. Quote, "From mobility itself our intellect turns aside, because it has nothing to gain in dealing with it. If the intellect were meant for pure theorizing, it would take its place within movement, for movement is reality itself, and immobility is always only apparent or relative. But the intellect is meant for something altogether different. Unless it does violence to itself, it takes the opposite course. It always starts from immobility, as if this were the ultimate reality." Henry Bergson, Creative Evolution, page 163. Intelligence concentrates only on the harvest, i.e. on the product, and not on the production, which is for it only the means, a series of steps, for arriving at the product. It is always the result to which it aspires. It is always the autumn of things and events which it has in view. It is orientated towards facts, accomplished things, and not towards the process of creation or that of becoming. The springtime and the summer of things and events either escape it or are taken into account only under the aspect of autumn as its stages of preparation. Germination and growth are then considered only in relation to the harvest. Mobility comes into being. This is germination and growth, whilst the harvest is what is become. It is the product. Quite other than the principle underlying intelligence, the principle of autumn, is that underlying the intuition of faith. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and nothing that was made without him. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. John 1, 1-4. The Gospel according to John advances here the principle of the intuition of faith, the principle of springtime. It is the beginning, the springtime of things of the world, to which the Gospel of St. John aspires, and it is the creative word, the mobility itself at the heart of life and underlying the light of consciousness, that it advances as the point of departure for all that follows. The Gospel of St. John invites us from the outset to an unparalleled act of violence to our intelligence, in transposing from autumn, where it is at home, to full springtime, from the harvest to the sowing, from things made to the creative word, from vivified things to life itself, from illumined things to light itself. We shall occupy ourselves in more detail with creative intuition, or the mystery of faith, in the letter on the 19th arcanum of the tarot, the sun, which is the arcanum of springtime. Here it is a matter simply of portraying more clearly the lunar or autumnal principle of intelligence by means of contrasting the principle of creative intuition, such as it is stated in the first chapter of the Gospel of St. John, with the principle of intelligence, which is the theme of the 18th arcanum of the tarot. Now, the Gospel of St. John appeals to the human soul to transpose its intelligence from autumn into full springtime, to rejuvenate it by placing it in the domain of creativity instead of that of the created, i.e. to accomplish a conjunction of the sun and moon, expressing it in astrological terms. This means to say that if the postulate of intelligence is that there is nothing new under the sun, it is invited to adapt itself to the pure and simple creativity expressed in the formula, "In the beginning was the Word," that if intelligence represents clearly to itself only immobility, it is bidden to plunge itself into the act of pure creation of the Word. That if intelligence represents clearly to itself only discontinuity, it finds itself confronted with the Word, in which is the life which is the light of men. That if intelligence has for its principal object inorganic solidity, it now has the task of understanding both the whole world as the organizatory act of the Word, and Jesus Christ as the cosmic Word made flesh. That if, lastly, intelligence is characterized by a natural incomprehension of life, it has now to understand the word at the heart of life, and the life underlying the light of consciousness. And all this it will do not in order to understand, i.e. in order to reap that which is, but rather in order to effect an act of becoming, in order to accomplish the birth of the new, i.e. of that which is not. Because to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will, or of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. John 1:12-13. Here is the difference between the nature of intelligence and that of intuition of faith, between the principle of autumn and that of spring. The former is understanding of that which is, the latter is participation in the becoming of that which is to be. When Abraham left Ur and went to a strange country by way of the desert in order to give birth to a people of the future, some centuries after him, he acted as a man of the springtime, or a man of faith. When Solomon, in the treatise known under the title Ecclesiastes, summarized all that he had learnt during his life through experience and reflection, he acted as a man of autumn, a man of intelligence. Abraham was a sower, Solomon was a reaper. Insofar as Hermeticism is concerned, it has a history of continuous and sustained effort aimed at an alliance of intelligence and the intuition of faith, the alchemical marriage of the moon and the sun. Is this marriage possible? St. Thomas Aquinas, Henry Bergson, and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, among others, say yes, each in his own way. I have chosen these three names because they represent theology, philosophy, and science. No doubt it is encouraging that these eminent representatives of religion, philosophy, and science lend their assistance to our task. But if this were not so, would we be able to aspire to anything else? Would we be able to abandon the millennial-old work and effort aimed at alliance, at the marriage and union of intelligence and faith? No, because whether we like it or not, we are engaged on this way forever, even if it were a matter only of a mirage. I say even if it were a matter only of a mirage, because this alliance, this marriage, this union has inspired, and still inspires, a continuous and sustained effort through the millennia, but this effort has never, as far as I know, been crowned with complete success. Intelligence and the intuition of faith sometimes approach quite near. They sometimes collaborate as allies. They sometimes complement one another in a way that gives rise to the highest hope. But their true fusion, their complete and lasting alchemical marriage, is still not achieved. In the minds and hearts of certain workers at this great work, intelligence and the intuition of faith already act as an engaged couple, but not yet as a married couple. There has as yet been no complete success in obtaining the alloy of these two metals. It is always either silvered gold or gilded silver. With Thomas Aquinas, for example, it is silvered gold. With most occultist authors, it is gilded silver. Origenes, Dionysius the Areopagite, Jacob Boehme, Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, Vladimir Soloviev, and Nicholas Berdyaev, for example, show in their works a progress which is very advanced in substantially bringing together intelligence and the intuition of faith. The same could be said for Henry Bergson and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Here is the endeavour that Henry Bergson proposes to us in the direction of a fusion of intelligence and intuition. After having ascertained that the intellect is characterized by a natural inability to comprehend life, Bergson illumines the nature of instinct. Instinct, on the contrary, is moulded on the very form of life. While intelligence treats everything mechanically, instinct proceeds, so to speak, organically. If the consciousness that slumbers in it should awake, if it were wound up into knowledge instead of being wound off into action, if we could ask and it could reply, it would give to us the most intimate secrets of life. Instinct and intelligence are two divergent developments of one and the same principle, which in the one case remains within itself, in the other steps out of itself and becomes absorbed in the utilization of inert matter. Pages 174 and 177. A very significant fact is the swing to and fro of scientific theories of instinct, from regarding it as intelligent to regarding it as simply intelligible, or shall I say, between likening it to an intelligence lapsed and reducing it to a pure mechanism. Each of these systems of explanation triumphs in its criticism of the other, the first when it shows us that instinct cannot be a mere reflex, the other when it declares that instinct is something different from intelligence, even fallen into unconsciousness. The concrete explanation, no longer scientific but metaphysical, or hermetic, must be sought along quite another path, not in the direction of intelligence, but in that of sympathy. Instinct is sympathy. If this sympathy could extend its object and also reflect upon itself, it would give us the key to vital operations, just as intelligence, developed and disciplined, guides us into matter. For, we cannot too often repeat it, intelligence and instinct are turned in opposite directions, the former towards inert matter, the latter towards life. Intelligence, by means of science, which is its work, will deliver up to us more and more completely the secret of physical operations, of life it brings us, and moreover only claims to bring us a translation in terms of inertia. It goes all round life, taking from outside the greatest possible number of views of it, drawing it into itself instead of entering into it. But it is to the very inwardness of life that intuition leads us. By intuition, I mean instinct that has become disinterested, self-conscious, capable of reflecting upon its object and of enlarging it indefinitely. Henry Bergson, Creative Evolution, page 174, 177, 185 to 186. Here, therefore, is the practical task of the endeavour. It envisages rendering the instincts disinterested, i.e., the true aim of all asceticism, or that part of the way towards mystical union that tradition calls via purgativa, the way of purification of the spiritual disciple, or also purgatorium, or purgatory, when it is a matter of the way of human destiny. Then it envisages instinct becoming conscious of itself, i.e., what tradition calls via illuminativa, the way of illumination of the spiritual disciple, or also coelum, or heaven, when it is a matter of the way of human destiny. And then, lastly, it envisages instinct becoming capable of reflecting upon its object and expanding indefinitely, whilst being completely united to it through sympathy, i.e., what tradition calls via unitiva, the way of union. The fruits of the way of union are gnosis, where instinct is capable of reflecting upon its object, and the mysticism of contemplation, where instinct is capable of expanding indefinitely, or also the visio beatifica, or beatific vision, which human souls enjoy in heaven after purgatory and after their celestial school, in which they learn not to be dazzled by the divine light, but rather to see through it, when it is a matter of the way of human destiny. Such is the task. But what is the endeavour? How is it to be realized? It consists of the enterprise of the going out of intelligence from its milieu. Here is what Bergson has to say on this. In vain, we shall be told, you claim to go beyond intelligence. How can you do that except by intelligence? All that is clear in your consciousness is intelligence. You are inside your own thought, you cannot get out of it. Say, if you like, that the intellect is capable of progress, that it will see more and more clearly into a greater and greater number of things. But do not speak of engendering it, for it is with your intellect itself that you would have to do the work. The objection presents itself naturally to the mind. But the same reasoning would prove also the impossibility of acquiring any new habit. It is of the essence of reasoning to shut us up in the circle of the given. But action breaks the circle. If we had never seen a man swim, we might say that swimming is an impossible thing, inasmuch as, to learn to swim, we must begin by holding ourselves up in the water and, consequently, already know how to swim. Reasoning, in fact, always nails us down to the solid ground. But if, quite simply, I throw myself into the water without fear, I may keep myself up well enough at first by merely struggling, and gradually adapt myself to the new environment. I shall thus have learnt to swim. So, in theory, there is a kind of absurdity in trying to know otherwise than by intelligence. But if the risk be frankly accepted, action will perhaps cut the knot that reasoning has tied, and will not unloose. Besides, the risk will appear to grow less the more our point of view is adopted. We have shown that intellect has detached itself from a vastly wider reality, but that there has never been a clean cut between the two. All around conceptual thought there remains an indistinct fringe which recalls its origin. And further, we compared the intellect to a solid nucleus formed by means of condensation. This nucleus does not differ radically from the fluid surrounding it. It can only be reabsorbed in it because it is made of the same substance. He who throws himself into the water, having known only the resistance of the solid earth, will immediately be drowned if he does not struggle against the fluidity of the new environment. He must perforce still cling to that solidity, so to speak, which even water presents. Only on this condition can he get used to the water's fluidity. So of our thought, when it has decided to make the leap. But leap it must, that is, leave its own environment. Reasoning on its powers, will never succeed in extending them, though the extension would not appear at all unreasonable once it were accomplished. Thousands and thousands of variations on the theme of walking will never yield a rule for swimming. Come, enter the water, and when you know how to swim, you will understand how the mechanism of swimming is connected with that of walking. Swimming is an extension of walking, but walking would never have pushed you on to swimming. So you may speculate as intelligently as you will on the mechanism of intelligence. You will never, by this method, succeed in going beyond it. You may get something more complex, but not something higher, nor even something different. You must take things by storm. You must thrust intelligence outside itself by an act of will. Henry Bergson, Creative Evolution, pages 202 to 204. This is the essence of Bergsonian yoga, i.e. the practical method of making intelligence unite itself with instinct, or the principle of sympathy, so that the latter can extend its subject matter and reflect upon itself, or in other words, so as to develop intuition. Now, the endeavour that Bergson has in mind is what the Kabbalah calls kavana, and the result of this endeavour, that Bergson calls intuition, is called DAATH. Kavana is profound meditation, i.e. the endeavour of intelligence which aims at plunging into the depths of darkness surrounding it. Kavana differs essentially from Cartesian meditation, where it is a matter, notably, of the concentration of the clarity of intelligence itself within itself, and also from Kantian meditation, where intelligence strives to rise above itself by making itself the object of observation, analysis, and criticism. Profound meditation, or kavana, is neither only concentration of the light of intelligence with a view to the intensification of its clarity, nor is it only the endeavour of intelligence to arrive at knowledge of itself. Profound meditation is the endeavour of intelligence to probe the dark depths which surround it, and to which it finds access by means of sympathy, instead of through the exercise of its own logical, analytical, and critical faculties. Speaking in terms of the Kabbalah, it is therefore a matter of the marriage of the principle of intelligence, the Sephirah Bina, and the principle of wisdom, the Sephiroth Chokmah, in the middle pillar of the Sephiroth tree. DAATH is therefore the state of consciousness where intelligence and wisdom, acquired and acquirable knowledge on the one hand, and latent and actualizable knowledge on the other hand, become one. It is the same state of consciousness that the Church calls intellect illumined by grace, intellectus gratia illuminatus, grace being the principle actualizing within us latent knowledge of the image and likeness of God, and intellect being the Bergsonian intelligence, which unites with and understands things that it would never have understood from within itself. It is therefore illumined. With respect to the Sephiroth tree of the Kabbalah, it must be pointed out that DAATH is nowhere to be found as a Sephirah, or as a constituent element of the system or tree of Sephiroth. Whereas there are 4 Sephiroth to be found on the middle pillar, namely Kether, or the crown, Tifereth, or beauty, Yesod, or the foundation, and Malkuth, or the kingdom, DAATH is somewhere to be created, to be added to the Sephiroth tree. This means to say that a synthesis of the pillar of wisdom, containing the Sephiroth Gedula, or majesty, and Netzach, or victory, and the pillar of intelligence, containing the Sephiroth Geburah, or power, and Hod, or glory, is foreseen in the Sephiroth tree only for the worlds of creation Olam Habriya, and formation, Olam HaYetzirah, whilst in the world of emanation, or Olam HaAtziluth, the synthesis constitutes the point of departure of emanation, creation, and formation of the world, and the world of action, or Olam HaAsiya, is itself the synthesis of the two columns, wisdom and intelligence. As is evident from this scheme of the Sephiroth tree, there is a synthesis of the principles of wisdom and intelligence preceding the division of these two principles, which takes place in the Sephirah Kether. There is also a synthesis which takes place in the world of action, or Malkuth. Otherwise it is effected in artistic creativity, or Tifereth, or in love between the sexes, or Yesod. But it is not foreseen here for the act of knowledge, i.e. for the domain of gnosis. Now, it is precisely the act of knowledge which is in question in the case of DAATH, which is the aim of the spiritual school of the Kabbalah. Just as it is that of Hermeticism in general, it is nothing other than the task of the realization of intuition, by uniting disinterested instinct and disinterested intelligence, as advanced by Henry Bergson. Kabbalists and Hermeticists, including Henry Bergson, therefore pursue the same aim, i.e., the union of intelligence and wisdom, or spontaneous knowledge, other than their union in artistic or aesthetic creativity and in love between the sexes. They have it in mind to achieve a third type of union of intelligence and wisdom, the Gnostic union, DAATH, or intuition. We have spoken above of this millennial-old task of Hermeticism. This work and effort continued from century to century, aiming at a complete fusion or marriage of the principles of intelligence and wisdom, i.e. of the power of knowledge acquired by logical discourse and the spontaneous knowledge of revelation. We have also pointed to some concrete facts, i.e. names of such personalities which are of a nature to inspire in us the hope that this work will one day be realized. Nevertheless, it is not yet so, because it is a matter of the realization of the third great arcanum of the Hermetic tradition. The Hermetic tradition teaches the existence of three great arcana, the third of which is that of the marriage of intelligence and wisdom, or DAATH. Here is how the great arcana are placed in the oral tradition of Hermeticism, making use of the Sephiroth tree. The Sephiroth tree, as is well known, consists not only of the Sephiroth located in the four worlds, or emanation, creation, formation, and action, but also of lines of communication, or channels, between the Sephiroth. There are therefore 22 channels joining the 10 Sephiroth in the Sephiroth tree. See the left figure. Beyond the 10 Sephiroth themselves, special significance is attached to the 3 crossing points on the middle pillar of horizontal channels with vertical channels. See the right figure. These 3 crossing points, each marked in the scheme by a St. Andrew's cross, indicate the metaphysical or psychological points where the 3 tasks, named Great Arcana, are to be realized. The first Great Arcanum, called the Great Magical Arcanum, is situated at the crossing point of the horizontal channel joining the Sephiroth Netzach, or victory, and Hod, or glory, and the vertical channel joining Tifereth, or beauty, and Yesod, or foundation. It belongs to the world of formation. The second Great Arcanum, the Arcanum of moral geniality, is situated at the crossing point of the horizontal channel joining the Sephiroth Gedula, or majesty, and Geburah, or power, and the vertical channel joining Kether, or crown, and Tifereth, or beauty. It belongs to the world of creation. The third Great Arcanum, that of geniality in the domain of knowledge, the Gnostic Arcanum, is situated at the crossing point of the horizontal channel joining the Sephiroth Chokmah, or wisdom, and Binah, or intelligence, and the vertical channel joining Kether, crown, and Tifereth, or beauty. It is the state of consciousness that Kabbalists call DAATH, that the Hindu yogis call Samadhi, and that we call here, with Henry Bergson, intuition. It belongs essentially to the world of emanation, i.e. the sphere of divine respiration, the sphere of the Holy Spirit. The Great Magical Arcanum is therefore the centre of the cross formed by the current, inspired elevation, certainty of knowledge, and the current, beauty, love. It is a matter, therefore, of the task of realizing the marriage of the creative fire of imagination with the limpid clarity of the waters of thought in the current which goes out from beauty and ends in love. The great arcanum of the moral life is the center of the cross formed by the binary magnanimity to justice in the current divine radiation to beauty. It is a matter of the realization of the marriage of the charity which pardons all and everything with the judgment of strict justice in the current which emanates from divine essence and arrives at the realization of beauty. The great arcanum of knowledge is the center of the cross formed by the binary wisdom intelligence in the current divine radiation to beauty. It is a matter of the realization of the marriage of revelation from above with argumentative intelligence based on experience. The three great arcana of the tradition are therefore three crosses formed by the vertical middle pillar and three horizontal channels on the Sephiroth tree. This is why the triple cross is the traditional symbol of complete initiation, and this is also why the title Trismegistus, or Thrice Greatest, is attributed to the founder of Hermeticism, the author of the Emerald Table. Much has been written on the Gnostic, moral and magical great arcana, and no doubt still more will be written in the future, their themes being central and inexhaustible at one and the same time. Here it is a matter simply of considering the great arcanum of the marriage of intelligence and wisdom in the context of the two other great arcana of the tradition. For the three great arcana are, truth to tell, only three aspects on three planes of one single great arcanum of the marriage of opposites in the head, in the heart, and in the will. In other words, it is a matter of three aspects of the sole great arcanum of the cross, since it is always the cross which realizes the marriage of opposites, including that of the formal knowledge of intelligence and the material knowledge due to revelation from above. The intuition of which Henri Bergson speaks is the fruit of the gradual transmutation of intelligence, which has put its light at the disposal of the whispering, from black depths, of instinct wisdom. It is the vow of obedience made by intelligence to the element which transcends it, which works its gradual transformation of the organ of formal knowledge, i.e., of the knowledge of the relationships of things and beings, into an organ of material knowledge, i.e., of the knowledge of things and beings as such. And it is the vow of poverty made by intelligence to the element which transcends it, which renders it capable of perceiving this element and of receiving its intimate teaching, with regard to which it would be deaf and blind if it were not emptied of its own richness, i.e., if it did not know how to reduce itself to silence in order to listen. And it is, lastly, the vow of chastity made by intelligence to the element which transcends it, which transforms it gradually from an entity greedy for quantity of knowledge into an entity which seeks only the profound and essential, i.e., quality. The Gnostic aspect of the great arcanum of the conjunction of opposites, or conjunctio oppositorum, or the marriage of opposites, is thus the transmutation of intelligence which is occupied with the how of things into an intuitive organ which is occupied with the what of things. It is at the same time the transformation of the revelation of wisdom from beyond the threshold of intelligence, which proceeds, from the point of view of intelligence, so spontaneously and in such a dogmatic manner that it appears to intelligence to be complete darkness from the unconscious, into intelligible language and communications that can be assimilated by the intelligence. In other words, the unconscious, instead of shocking intelligence, allies itself with it, penetrates it, and becomes luminous within it. But this takes place only after the more or less long and painful experience of the crucifixion of consciousness on the cross formed by the pair of opposites, subjectivity-objectivity, and the pair of opposites, intelligence-unconscious wisdom. The four elements of this cross correspond to the first three Sephiroth, Kether, Chokmah, and Binah, and the middle pillar between absolute subjectivity, or Kether, and absolute objectivity, or Malkuth. It is this cross where the gradual approach, alliance, and lastly union of intelligence and unconscious wisdom is effected. At the beginning of this process, intelligence and unconscious wisdom have so little in common that communication between them is reduced almost entirely to dreams, i.e. to the state of consciousness where intelligence, although present, is most passive. Then this communication is extended to the waking state also. The language of communication then becomes that of symbols, including those of the tarot. Lastly, intelligence and wisdom, no longer unconscious, arrive at such a degree of mutual comprehension that they understand directly without the intermediary of dreams and symbols. It is only then that their union is achieved, i.e. that the state of consciousness that Bergson calls intuition and that the Kabbalists identify with DAATH is attained. Direct communication between intelligence and wisdom is, truth to tell, only the development of conscience, which is extended from the domain of action to the domain of knowledge, and is awakened there to the point of becoming the light of intelligence. Conscience has two aspects, notably: a negative aspect, well known, and of which much is made in daily life, which manifests itself as warning disapproving an action before its execution, or else as remorse disapproving of an action already committed, and a positive aspect, almost wholly ignored in daily life, which manifests itself as an impulse recommending an action before its execution, and a serene joy after its execution. It is above all this positive aspect of conscience which becomes the illuminating and revelatory principle of intelligence, i.e. when the latter unites with unconscious wisdom, which is nothing other than the principle of conscience. Therefore intuition is, after all, only the marriage of intelligence, having renounced its absolute autonomy, with conscience awoken to the point of becoming a source of concrete and precise revelations for intelligence. One could also simply say that intuition is intelligence become entirely conscientious, and that it is conscience become entirely intelligible for intelligence. Conscience thus offers intelligence as vast a world of inner experience as does the empirical world for outer experience. Intelligence can therefore develop itself and grow in two directions simultaneously: in the direction of the outer empirical world, thanks to the senses, and in that of the inner empirical world, thanks to conscience. Conscience is the door, the sole, legitimate and healthy one, to a world at least as vast and much more profound than the world that we perceive with the senses. And it is the decision of intelligence to become the servant of conscience, just as in the Middle Ages philosophy considered itself the servant of theology, which opens this door. The leading role of conscience in the passage from the surface world to the depth world has long been known of in the tradition. It was dramatized and concretized by speaking of the guardian of the threshold and of the meeting with him. The decisive role was assigned to this meeting, concerning the passage across the threshold which separates the surface world from the depth world, because the admission or rejection of the aspirant depends on this meeting. He who could not bear the truth concerning himself, revealed to him by the guardian of the threshold at this meeting, fell back, i.e. decided to content himself with the surface world, the world of outer experience and constructions of argumentative intelligence. Whilst he who had the courage and humility necessary to bear the revelation of the truth concerning himself passed the threshold and was therefore admitted to the school of esoteric life, i.e. to the depth world. The guardian of the threshold figures in the tradition, including more recent contributions to the tradition, either as a kind of double incorporating the whole past of the person in question, or also as a hierarchical entity of the rank of an archangel, who teaches the lesson of conscience by means, this is only one means, of projecting the double of the human personality aspiring to the depth world. The latter conception of the guardian of the threshold and of the nature of the meeting with him is more complete and still more true. The guardian of the threshold is not a moral bogey for bowling over the spiritual bourgeoisie, but rather our elder brother and servant of God, who helps us with infinite kindness and superhuman wisdom, although with perfect truthfulness, to advance from the surface to the depths. At least such is the evidence of the experience of 5 people of this century known to me. The guardian of the threshold spoken of in the Hermetic tradition is the great judge, charged with preserving the equilibrium of that which is above and that which is below. The traditional iconography of the Church represents him with a sword and balance. The sword is his vivifying and healing action, giving courage and humility to the soul which hungers and thirsts for the depths, and the balance is his action of presenting the precise account of what must be paid in order to have the right to go further. It was Maitre Philip of Lyons who, as much as any I know, had the most profound comprehension and the most complete knowledge of the practical manipulation of the balance referred to here. He did not tire of repeating, "Pay your debts, pay the debts of your neighbours, because each will pay his debt, and it does not matter if it is paid in this world or in the other, provided that it is paid." Le Maitre Philippe de Lyons, Paris, 1958. This is why, before healing a sickness, he often asked the sick person and the people around him to pay the price of healing, which he fixed as a certain time of abstention from slander with regard to others, which time he measured according to the case either by hours or by weeks. Another way of paying debts, one's own or others, is by giving money to the poor or to a good cause. Our ancestors had the right sentiment in leaving money to the poor, to the church, to hospitals, or in accompanying their novenas of prayer for pardon and for healing by gifts of money paid to the poor or to good causes. They knew instinctively that debts must be paid and that it is better to pay them here than after death. They still had a feeling for the reality of the balance of the guardian of the threshold. The guardian of the threshold, spoken of in the tradition, is therefore the administrator of the justice of conscience, and at the same time the master of the school of conscience. His balance signifies the negative aspect of conscience, and his sword signifies the positive aspect of conscience, i.e. the revelatory and healing aspect. One cannot dispense with the meeting with the guardian of the threshold when one wants to cross the threshold which separates the surface world from the depth world. It is through the door of conscience that one must enter, and intuition, which reveals the depth world, is nothing other than intelligence submitted to conscience, submitted from the point of view of being one with it. There is therefore no esoteric or occult technique which is able to help us, without speaking of making us, pass from the surface world to the depth world, other than the purely moral act of sacrificium intellectus, the sacrifice of intelligence to conscience. It is the recognition, once and for all, of the primacy of moral logic, its superiority to the formal logic of intelligence, which effects the passage from the state of reasoning to that of intuition. No exercise whatever for the concentration of attention or for the suppression of mental activity will alone help you to attain intuition. No breathing exercise or mental technique of itself will be of any use here. Because in order to attain an aim higher than intelligence and the body, one has to make use of means which are also higher than intelligence and the body. That which is spiritual is achieved only by spiritual means, and these comprise no technique beyond the purely moral act and endeavour. A strange thing. The Christian Occident, which has developed technique and technology to such an extent on the material plane, possesses hardly any psycho-spiritual technique and technology, whilst the Buddhist and pantheistic Orient, which has almost entirely neglected material technique, has developed a quite advanced body of psycho-spiritual technique and technology. It seems that the technological genius of intelligence in the Orient is turned towards, and perhaps is exhausted in, the domain of the inner life, whilst the same genius of intelligence in the Occident has exhausted or continues to exhaust its creativity in the domain of external life. The consequence of this is that the spiritual life of the Occident, its mysticism, gnosis, and magic, is developed above all under the sign of the principle of grace, and that the mysticism, gnosis, and magic of the Orient are developed above all under the sign of the principle of technology, i.e. the scientific empirical principle of the observation and utilization of the chain of cause and effects concerning efforts and that which results from them. Thus, for example, the classic work on yoga, the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, recommends, as useful to concentration, devotion to a personal god, to be abandoned later when having lost its utility, i.e. when the yogi will have acquired the aptitude to concentrate himself on the formless and impersonal. Yoga is the suppression of involuntary movements of the mental substance, says the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, i.e. according to the law of causality, the chain of cause and effect. It is the suppression of mental movements which is the cause whose effect is yoga or union with the absolute being. Now, St. John of the Cross, who was many times taken up in rapture through, or plunged in, union with the absolute being, also spoke in his writings of the state of the complete silence of personal intelligence, imagination, and will, the state, therefore, where mental movements are suppressed. But he does not tire of repeating that it is the divine presence, of which the soul is enamoured, which effects this silence, this suppression of the mental movements, and not the human will. The state of complete silence of intelligence, and, moreover, of the imagination and will, is present in the soul set ablaze by the love of God. There is no psycho-spiritual technology here. It is the mutual love between the soul and God which does all. Thus, here is the difference between the science of psycho-spiritual technique, or Raja Yoga, and the sheer grace of love in the night of the senses and the spirit of St. John of the Cross. The term sheer grace, which intends to specify this difference, is employed by St. John of the Cross himself. He says in his Songs of the Soul, in the dark night of the soul, "One dark night, fired with love's urgent longings, the sheer grace, I went out unseen, my house being now all stilled. My house being now at rest, the soul goes forth into the divine union of love, with the whole household of its powers and desires sunk in sleep and silence," says St. John of the Cross in his commentary to the verse. He says elsewhere, "It was a sheer grace for the soul that God had brought it into this dark night, from whence such great good came to it, and into which it would never have been able to enter by itself. Besides, no one would be capable, through his own forces alone, of disengaging himself from all his tendencies, the whole household of powers and desires, in order to go forth to God." St. John of the Cross, The Ascent of Mount Carmel, 1:1-5. Here he indicates the precise difference between the Christian way, the way of purification, illumination, and the consummation of union, where there is nothing concerning technique, and that of yoga, which comprises a scale ranging from techniques of physical preparation, or hatha yoga, to psychomental techniques, or Raja Yoga. There is nothing of technique. Here all is art and grace, in Christian mysticism, gnosis, and magic. And how is it concerning the reciting of the Rosary Prayer amongst Catholics, and the Prayer of the Heart, or the Jesus Prayer, practiced in the Orthodox Church? The prayer of the heart is the uninterrupted repetition, day and night, with the beating of the heart of the prayer, Kyrie Iesu Christe eleison, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Or, again, the Irish monks, who recited each day all the psalms by heart. Is it not a matter here also of a technique? The principle of rhythm and that of technique, or maximum effect with the minimum effort, differ as biology differs from mechanics, or as a living organism from a machine. The repetition of ages and generations, festivals, the rituals of religious cult, breathing, the beating of the heart, prayer, with respect to the Rosary Prayer and the practice of the prayer of the heart, and also with respect to the daily recital of the Psalms, are manifestations and applications of the principle of rhythm, whilst, for example, the prayer wheel of the Tibetans, turning in the wind, is the application of the mechanical principle, i.e. the fundamental principle of the technique of minimum effort in order to obtain maximum effect. Rhythm in prayer makes it pass from the psychological domain to that of life, from the domain of personal tendencies and moods to that of the fundamental and universal impulses of life itself. Speaking in occult terms, here it is a matter of carrying prayer over from the astral body, or soul body, to the etheric body, or vital body, i.e. of making prayer employ the language of life instead of the language of personal feelings and desires. And just as life is like a river which flows unceasingly, so does the Rosary Prayer, for example, flow without stopping and without fatigue, because that which lives is at the same time vivifying. Calm and rhythmic prayer life, does not take forces, it does not tire, but gives forces to the person praying. This is why the anonymous author of the writing The Way of a Pilgrim, dealing with the experiences of a Russian pilgrim devoted to the practice of the prayer of the heart, speaks of the experience of plenitude and serene joy which filled him day and night, giving him a foretaste, already on the earth, of celestial beatitude. It is the same with the practice of the Rosary Prayer. The 150 Ave Marias and the 15 Paternosters of the Rosary Prayer introduce one to the universal river of spiritual life, which is the proof of a universal prayer, and thus lead one to joyous serenity. The pilgrim points out, in the 3rd chapter of The Way of a Pilgrim, before his experience of the uninterrupted prayer of the heart, and even before he learnt of its existence, that in himself and his wife, the wish for prayer was there, and the long prayers we said without quite understanding did not seem tiring. Indeed, we liked them. Clearly it is true, as a certain teacher once told me, that a secret prayer lies hidden within the human heart. The man himself does not know it, yet working mysteriously within his soul, it urges him to prayer according to each man's knowledge and power. The Way of a Pilgrim, London, 1954, pages 70 to 71. It is perhaps this secret prayer in the unconscious of the soul which St. Paul has in mind in the epistle to the Galatians, where he says, "And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father." Galatians 4:6. Now, it is a rhythm which unites conscious prayer and this unconscious secret prayer, and it is as a consequence of their union that prayer effort becomes prayer life, i.e. that prayer of the soul becomes a spiritual prayer. The Rosary Prayer, the prayer of the heart, litanies and psalms that are repeated, etc., effect the transformation of prayer effort into prayer life. Far from being means of the mechanization of prayer, they spiritualize it. Do not be scandalized, dear unknown friend, by the fact that you find yourself confronted with the Rosary Prayer in a Hermetic meditation on the 18th Arcanum of the Tarot, the Arcanum which teaches how to surmount eclipsed lunar intelligence. Esotericism is not a collection of extraordinary and unknown things, but rather it is above all a less ordinary and less known way of seeing ordinary and known things, of seeing their profundity. And the Rosary Prayer, wholly exoteric and known to satiety, as it is, reveals profound truths of spiritual life, including that of the union of prayer of the soul and spiritual prayer. It is, moreover, closely related to the theme of the 18th Arcanum of the Tarot, the Arcanum of knowing how to pass from intelligence eclipsed by terrestrial technicality to intelligence illumined by the spiritual sun, i.e., to intuition. In other words, the leap to which Henry Bergson invites our intelligence can be made by saying the Rosary Prayer. The opinion of a Capuchin friar? It could be, but why can't a Capuchin friar be right? Sometimes at least. Be that as it may, I declare openly that practical Hermeticism is above all the desire and capacity to learn from everyone and everything, and that knowing better is its coffin. Knowing better, the state of consciousness which is present when one has made a review of the totality of efforts made in the past and the results obtained from them, by observing the fixed rules of the game, plunges intelligence into a pond of stagnant water with an exact geometrical border, which encloses it and makes it retreat, like a crayfish, in the face of all that is new and demands creative effort. Intelligence retreats into its element of stagnant water before the antinomy of mental psychism, i.e. the antinomy credulous obedience, critical revolt. It does likewise in the face of the intellectual antinomy thesis-antithesis, which rises up before it like two stone towers, rigid and immobile in their opposition. And above these antinomies, where the third term, the synthesis, should be found, it sees only a human face, only the projection of human will, desirous of an intellectual arrangement so as to disencumber itself of disquieting contradictions. Whilst retreating, whilst refusing to decide to leap or fly either over the dog of submission to authority or credulous obedience, and the wolf of criticism denying all authority or critical revolt, or over the intellectual Tower of Babel of theses and that of their antitheses, intelligence nevertheless remains ill at ease because of the imperceptible drops emanating from the radiation of synthesis eclipsed by the projection of the shadow of arbitrary human will, which fall into its subconscious and constantly disturb it. For although the moon, intelligence illumined by the sun, is eclipsed, it nevertheless exercises a constant influence on intelligence through a kind of rain, whose drops fall into the subconsciousness of intelligence and produce there movement and confused, disquieting noise. Yes, knowing better, when it has once taken hold of intelligence, sets it fully in the scene of the card of the 18th arcanum of the tarot, the moon. The context of the card, the eclipsed moon above, the two towers and the two representatives of the canine species in the middle, and the pond with the crayfish below, says, being confronted with two antinomies, one psychic and one intellectual, you have no other choice than to advance, which means to say, to raise yourself up, or to retreat, which means to say, to sink yourself into a stagnant element. Choose. This choice being of utmost importance, its environment must be seen as clearly as possible. Therefore, here is the geometrical figure underlying the situation. See figure. Now this figure, that of a square with two triangles opposed, is magical. Namely, it is the classical figure of sympathetic or voodoo magic, i.e. the magical operation or magical mechanism which immobilizes the conscious will by means of two antinomies in the horizontal, the square, and an antinomy in the vertical, the two peaks of the opposed triangles. It goes without saying that it is not a matter of poisonous magic making use of aqua tofana, poison nosegays, the shirt of Nessus, and other deadly instruments still stranger and less known, of which Eliphas Levi speaks under the title of the 18th arcanum of the tarot in his Dogme rituel de la haute magie. No, it is a matter of something more serious and more profound, namely the arcanum of intelligence with conscience eclipsed. It is the arcanum of the magical mechanism, working behind the surface of the state of intelligence, which aims at explaining movement by the immobile, life by the non-living, consciousness by the unconscious, morality by the amoral. Indeed, how has it happened to mankind that many of its intelligent representatives, even its leaders and directors, have come to see in the brain not the instrument but the producer of consciousness, in chemistry not the instrument but the producer of life, in the economic sphere not the instrument but the producer of culture? How can it be that human intelligence has arrived, in so far as many of its representatives are concerned, at seeing man without a soul and the world without God? What secret and hidden force is at work, pushing and forcing human intelligence to say first of all that the essential problems are insoluble, things transcending the senses and intelligible being unknowable, and then to deny their very existence? In other words, how has it happened that human intelligence finds itself in a state of metaphysical eclipse? It is sympathetic or voodoo magic, and it is the 18th arcanum of the tarot which can give us the answer to these questions. Answer in this case, and in Hermeticism in general, signifies enabling one to see, or opening the eyes. For each arcanum, insofar as it is an arcanum, is not a doctrine, but rather an event, that of opening the eyes, i.e. the opening up of an inner sense which permits things to be seen in a new way. And this is precisely the matter at hand in the case of the set of problems belonging to the 18th arcanum of the tarot. Human intelligence has undergone the effects of what is no more, nor no less, than voodoo magic. Its conscious motivating will is immobilized in the square of two antinomies, that of authority, autonomy, and that of affirmation, negation. In order to come out from this, it has to either retreat into the region of the sub-intelligent, or else advance into the region of the superintelligent, i.e. to retreat in the fashion of the crayfish in its pond, or to advance by surpassing itself, in rising above itself by means of leaping or flying, and not to build towers of Babel, or to bay plaintively or howl furiously in the way of the dog and the wolf. Now, it is retreat which has been chosen by many representatives of human intelligence. Others make only plaintive elegies to the romantic past, where intelligence was bathed in the light from above. Still others make only thunder and lightning against the errors and sins of the tragic past with its dogmatism and authoritarianism. Others, lastly, unconcerned about what takes place around them in their intellectual environment, continue to build towers of intellectual systems of affirmation or negation, which are of the nature of towers of Babel. Thus, some retreat into the sub-intelligent, i.e., give themselves over to the way of seeing the cause of the advanced and the evolved in the primitive, the cause of consciousness in raw matter, the cause of the rational in the irrational, and the cause of the moral in the amoral, whilst others pour themselves out in elegies concerning the golden age of the past, or angrily make thunder and lightning concerning its imperfections. Whilst, lastly, still others build intellectual towers of Babel, founded on theses of affirmation or negation, chosen from the darkness of the inner ceiling of the skull, and eclipsing revelatory and directing consciousness. One begins to see and to expect only the projection of the primary and elementary impulses of human nature: pleasure, Freud; the will to power, Nietzsche, Adler; material and economic problems, Marx; the projection of the terrestrial element of human nature onto the nocturnal luminary, moral consciousness, causes its eclipse. One no longer sees anything worthwhile, and one also no longer expects anything worthwhile. The eclipsed moon with the human face instead of reflected solar light, the arid plain with two towers and with a dog and a wolf howling from below, the pond with stagnant water geometrically enclosed and shielding the crayfish. Doesn't the totality of this imagery at first evoke troubling feelings, and then disquieting ideas relating to a far-reaching operation of voodoo magic, whose victim is human intelligence? Indeed, with Kant, the limits of intelligence were brought to light, i.e., he demonstrated the fact of its imprisonment, and he addressed thinking humanity with the grave warning that one can formulate in the language of imagery of the 18th arcanum of the tarot as follows. The nocturnal luminary is eclipsed. You find there the face of a man instead of the pure light of cosmic objective truth. One can escape the prison of this eclipse only by turning to the moral consciousness of the transcendent self. Since Kant, the fact of the spellbound state of intelligence has increased more and more in significance and certainty, up to the present day. In this letter, we have quoted Henry Bergson fully because he demonstrated this in an extremely lucid and well-founded manner. But Henry Bergson was not alone in ascertaining the subjective imprisonment of intelligence and making appeal to coming out of it. Whatever the divergence in their views and in other respects may be, Schopenhauer, Dyson, Vladimir Soloviev, and Nicholas Berdyaev, to name only the well-known names, are in agreement in that which concerns the theme of the 18th arcanum of the tarot. Hegel even advanced the new metaphysical logic, the dialectic of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which is fundamentally only the reaffirmation of the intellectual aspect of the Hermetic method of the neutralization of binaries that one finds in alchemical treatises, and with Jacob Boehme, Saint Martin, Fabre d'Olivet, etc., which aims at intelligence coming out of its prison and raising itself to objective knowledge by means of intellectual intuition. In our time, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin has advanced an objective dialectic of evolution, which is no longer simply intellectual, but which is rather a way of seeing chemical, biological, psychic, intellectual, moral and spiritual processes in evolution, which proceeds according to an objective dialectic, i.e. everywhere ascertainable through all means of experience, namely divergence, convergence and emergence. This is no longer an aspect of Hermeticism, but is Hermeticism pure and simple, including mysticism, gnosis and magic, as well as all experience of the physical world as a unity. The fact that human intelligence is spellbound is therefore not only recognized, but also much effort is being made, and has already been made, towards freeing it. The question still remains with respect to the technique of the voodoo magic whose proven victim is intelligence. The technique in question is summarized by a single word: doubt. Doubt, dubium, Zweifel, somnony, etc., is the state of consciousness faced with an antinomy, i.e., two theses which seem to it to be equally well-founded and which contradict one another. Kant, for example, formulated four fundamental antinomies. 1. The world has a beginning in time and a limit in space. The world has no beginning in time and is infinite in space. 2. Substance consists of simple units. 2. Nothing in the world consists of simple units, and there is nothing in the world which is simple. 3. There is no freedom, everything is determined by natural causality. 2. Determinism according to nature's laws of causality is not the only kind that exists, for there also exists the determinism of causality having its source in freedom. And 4. The world presupposes an effective cause which is a necessary being. 2. There does not need to be any being, either in the world or beyond the world, which is its effective cause. In other words, the antinomies of the creation or the eternity of the world, of the simplicity or the infinite complexity of matter, of freedom or absolute determinism, of theism or atheism, are those which confront intelligence and are able to reduce it to impotence, i.e., to paralyze it, according to Kant. Leaving aside the question as to whether the Kantian antinomies are the only ones, or the most essential ones, they suffice to demonstrate the discouraging and therefore paralyzing effect of antinomies on intelligence, no matter whether they are real or false. Now, the technique of voodoo magic, acting on intelligence which has taken place in the history of the human race, consists, in the first place, in having put it in the presence of antinomies, real or false, which discourage it and paralyze it, i.e., which make it stop and give up progressing forward in the direction towards the profound. Then this effort is intensified by the demonstration of the subjective relativity of the solutions to these antinomies and of the contradictory nature of these solutions. That is, in the last analysis, only taste which determines for the authors of philosophical systems the foundation, structure, and architecture of their intellectual edifices. Plato's idealism, Aristotle's realism, Descartes' rationalism, Leibniz's monadism, Spinoza's monism, Schopenhauer's pessimistic voluntarism, Fichte's optimistic voluntarism, Hegel's dialectical absolutism, etc., are merely works of intellectual poetry whose differences depend only on the taste and talent of their authors. This is the second constituent element of the operation of voodoo magic with regard to human intelligence. Lastly, once ensnared in doubt, intelligence sees in illumination from above only manifestations of elements of human psychology, the face of man on the moon, and cannot see otherwise. Is the soul immortal, or is it the desire for self-preservation which is manifested by this thesis? Is man a microcosm, or is it the desire to be important which is at the root of this idea? Progress, evolution, an idea conceived of to render suffering, toil, and death bearable. God, an idea which guarantees that all will end well. Karma, this idea appeases, if not consoles, the blind, the deaf, and the dumb. The celestial hierarchies. One is afraid of emptiness, and therefore it is necessary to people a heaven with beings similar to us. Thus, instead of asking if this or that thesis is true, intelligence comes to occupy itself with psychological motives hidden behind the so-called game of rationalization, fashioning intellectual superstructures. It projects the face of man on the moon and sees there only this face. In this connection, I must say that there are two categories of people with whom I have had the greatest difficulty in conversing with any profit during my life. These categories not being those of people who either passionately affirm or who passionately deny in the intellectual domain, but rather the two categories of people, that of the psychologizers and that of the spiritualizers, who accept everything with a tolerance which appears perfect. For you cannot speak with psychologizers about objective things and truths in the world and in life. They would understand these only as psychological manifestations that they accept as indisputable, though interpretable, psychological facts. Therefore, you cannot arrive at agreement, nor be in disagreement, with a psychologizer concerning things of the world and of life, since if you speak of the moon, he will see only your face on the moon, if not his own. No more can you speak with a spiritualizer, i.e. with someone who holds that his higher and true self is identical with God, the higher and true self of the world, and who consequently sees and understands only manifestations of this same absolute, universal and eternal truth which is revealed, it alone, relatively in all philosophical and religious opinions. Just as the psychologizer projects his human lower self onto the luminary illumining the darkness of the depths of the world and life, so does the spiritualizer project his higher human self onto the same luminary. The one projects the human psychic face there, and the other projects the human spiritual face, but it is, in both cases equally, the human face which is projected there. Say to a spiritualizer that Jesus Christ was the Son of God incarnated, and he will reply to you that it is true, since in Jesus Christ was realized the universal and eternal truth of the identity of the true higher self with God. Then say to him that the incarnation was an act of sacrifice of divine love, and he will say to you that it is true, since love is the identity of all individual selves in the universal self of God, and that each individualization comprises one incarnation, and must necessarily be an act of sacrifice on the part of the higher universal self. If you then say to him that it was the victory over death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which signifies the uniqueness of the work accomplished by Jesus Christ, he will reply to you that there is no reason in the world to deny the fact of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, since the higher and universal self can always project mental images by Maya Shakti, to the point of making them appear visibly. Lastly, isn't the whole world a manifestation of mental force which renders the invisible visible? And if you say that Pentecost was the result of the work of Jesus Christ, he will reply to you, with evident benevolence, that to be sure it was Pentecost, which necessarily had to result from the work of the Avatar, Jesus Christ, since it was Pentecost where his disciples also realized the universal and eternal truth of the identity of all individual selves in the higher universal self, which is manifested by the fact that their speech became that of the higher self of each person who listened to them. And if you say lastly, desperate as you are to come at least to a disagreement with your interlocutor, that there is evil in the world, that the fall took place, and that there is original sin, he will say to you that without any doubt there is the fall and original sin, since the illusion of a plurality of individual consciousness has been arrived at, whilst they are identical and one in the consciousness of the universal self. A fall was therefore certainly necessary in order to arrive at such an illusion. Thus, the spiritualizer, as well as the psychologizer, are not people to converse with about things concerning the world and life. They look at, and consequently see, only the face, either psychic or spiritual, of man. Here it is the effect of the arcanum of the moon eclipsed by the face of man that is at work. It is therefore hardly surprising that the intelligence of those who do not want to see the world as a display of human subjectivity, and who, on the other hand, cannot or do not know how to make the leap of intelligence of which Henry Bergson speaks, that their intelligence is turned towards the objective facts of the five senses, and hence the retreat into the framework of the pond with the crayfish of the card of the 18th arcanum of the tarot. The operation of magical enchantment, the bringing into play of antinomies, and the projection of the face of man onto the luminary called to illumine the enigmas and secrets of the depths beyond the threshold of consciousness, i.e. of the night, has attained its aim by making intelligence retreat in the face of heaven, and even from the surface of the earth, into a region situated beneath the surface of the earth, i.e. that which underlies the facts of the senses, symbolized in the card by the pond with the crayfish. What is the state of intelligence which has abandoned all metaphysics, and has decided to hold to and to limit itself solely to objective facts of the senses? What is most characteristic of this state is that intelligence no longer moves forwards but backwards. It looks to the least developed and the most primitive for the cause and explanation of what is most developed and most advanced in the process of evolution. Thus it looks for the effective cause of the world, not in the heights of creative consciousness, but rather in the depths of the unconscious. Instead of going forward and elevating itself towards God, it retreats into matter. It does something with regard to the world which would be absurd with regard to a work of art, namely to explain it through the qualities and quantities of the materials of which it consists, instead of the style, the context, the meaning, and the intention which the work of art reveals. Wouldn't it be absurd to want to understand one of Victor Hugo's poems, for example, by chemically analyzing the ink with which it had been written and the paper on which it was written, or by counting the number of words and letters? Nevertheless, this is precisely what the intelligence under consideration does with regard to the world in which Victor Hugo's poem makes up only a part, and is only a single special case of the manifestation of the great process of the creation. Now the moment has arrived to conclude our meditation on the 18th Arcanum of the Tarot. Here is the conclusion that it asserts. Of the 4 Hyoth of the Kabbalah, the 4 sacred animals of Hermeticism, the eagle, the man, the lion, and the bull, we find 3 amongst the signs of the zodiac, i.e. the bull, the lion, and the man, or water-bearer. But we do not find the eagle. The eagle's place in the zodiacal circle is occupied by the scorpion. There, where the eagle, the principle of elevation, ought to be, the scorpion, the principle of retreat and suicide, is found. Now, the 18th Arcanum of the Tarot is that of the eagle and the scorpion, the arcanum of the replacement of the one by the other, because the crayfish of the card of the arcanum, the moon, has the scorpion as its prototype and as its aim. Intelligence which prefers retreating to flying must inevitably arrive at the impasse of absurdity, for example, the absurdity that we have pointed out above. And the absurd, this is suicide for intelligence. This is where crayfish intelligence goes after having renounced becoming eagle intelligence. The 18th Arcanum of the Tarot asks us, do you want to choose the way of the eagle which rises above antinomies, or the way of the crayfish which retreats before them until arriving at complete absurdity, i.e. at the scorpionic suicide of intelligence? This is the point, i.e. the message to the human will, of the 18th Major Arcanum of the Tarot.